Okay, let's talk about the military then. So I've heard that's particularly bad. The military housing is particularly bad.
I can tell you from firsthand experience, having visited a few different bases now, it's really bad. It's pervasive. It's disgusting. The last trip I did was in Key West. I literally went to get an IV after like visiting the base. Like that's how sick I started to feel. And I was there, I was exposed, for hours. Imagine living in these places 24/7, right?
Oh my gosh.
I've definitely become more sensitive to mold over the years. Like in my 20s, I felt like I could be around it a little more. Fun fact about me is I had asthma as a kid. I grew up in like a moldy New York City apartment. Okay. So it's like, as I connect the dots today, like it makes sense. I moved out of New York City, moved to a single family home in New Jersey. All of a sudden don't have asthma anymore. I'm better. Everything's great. And then, I get into this field and of course, I'm exposing myself, not all the time, not as much as when I really was in the field when I first started, but definitely getting exposed. Right. And so I see that sensitivity kind of developing. I'll tell you, like these places were so bad. The ceilings are literally caving in and they're just going in and they're just screwing pieces of wood up to stop the ceilings from caving in. The ceilings are caving in, by the way, because at some point they decided to convert from a asphalt shingle roof to a metal roof. This is Key West, very hot in Florida. Well, if you convert to a metal roof, obviously that's going to raise the temperature because metal is going to conduct that heat pretty well. You're going to raise that temperature of that attic space. Now, being in Florida where you have basically air conditioning the entire time that you're living there, that temperature differential is going to create condensation. So literally, we had moisture meters going around checking everything. The walls and the ceilings were like 100% wet, like 100%. Oh. Not even like a little wet, They should really be at zero, but one can argue as long as it's less than 18% or 12%, in that ballpark, you're okay. So, we're talking 100% wet. There's so much saturation's happening, ceilings are caving in, and the response was, we'll just go and put these pieces of wood up to stop the ceiling from caving in. Obviously, there's mold everywhere. I mean, we found mold in the HVAC units, found mold behind every wall we looked at, mold behind every ceiling we looked at. It's when you walk in, you get smacked in the face with this exorbitant smell of mold. Like you just know, like, we're not in a basement, but it smells like the worst basement you can smell, potentially imagine. And these homes are where our military is living and their families are living. And you think about it from this, like, this is a national security issue, right? Yeah. I love our country. I want our military to be strong and be able to defend this great nation. How can they possibly do that when they're overseas, training or dealing with a potential war and their families are sick back home? How do you do that? As a matter of fact, part of being an expert witness and being a part of some of these litigation cases, I've had the pleasure of reading emails from majors or sergeants literally writing to the military, to their superiors, please help me. I am trying to complete this mission while my family is going through hell back home. And like, you're looking at emails from the family and you're seeing what they're going through, and like they're trapped in the ER. Kids are constantly sick. They're coughing up a lung, and there's no help. And the people come in and they're kind of denying that there's mold there when you can see it. I've reviewed the reports. It's like exorbitant levels of mold that should not be in any home, right? And everyone's just kind of throwing their arms up and saying, well, I don't know. I think one of the bigger fundamental problems with the military housing is we had this amazing idea like 25, 30 years ago for some reason, give 50-year contracts to these like privatized industry companies to come in and essentially like maintain these facilities. So, privatized housing. So they're trying to basically run these places, but earn a profit. And there's no level of accountability that they're really required to have with respects to mold, right? One of the biggest arguments that they'll make is that, there's no, standard for what level of mold is safe or unsafe.
Yeah.
Right? Even though every professional knows If you've got mold growing indoors and it's clearly growing more than it is outside, you know that there's a problem inside. Every professional knows that. We also know, and the EPA says this as well, if you could see it, you need to remove it, right? And that can be misconstrued as, well, I didn't see it on the surface. Well, you need to check behind the surface sometimes. I mean, sometimes we have to actually drill holes through the walls and either test behind the wall or stick a camera behind the wall and actually see this stuff. I mean, when I tell you every wall I looked behind, there was mold. Every HVAC system I looked in, there was mold. And all of that stuff is just circulating around the house and entering people's bodies every time they take a breath 20,000 times per day. I mean, how do we not have people sick in that condition?
Is the refusal to fix that problem due to like them actually not thinking it's dangerous, mold is dangerous, or is it more malevolent than that? Like, do they know that this housing issue is an actual problem, or are they just like, it's just mold, it's fine?
Hard to say. I think you have, there are some people out there that do not believe that mold is a problem. Yeah. Despite all the research, despite all the science, right? They do not believe that mold is a problem. It doesn't make very much sense to me, because anything that you learn in sort of like the scientific and medical community is air transmission is one of the greatest routes of exposure. COVID-19 ring a bell, anyone, right? So things travel through the air and we breathe them in, has a great risk of us getting sick from that point, right? And so when we look at it from that perspective, how do we not consider mold as a potential impact, irregardless of, like how strong you feel that the science may or may not be? The other thing is, with mold and it suppresses your immune system. I mean, we make immune suppressing drugs out of mold. Mycophenolic acid is a mycotoxin produced by certain species of mold. Yet mycophenolic acid is what we take to literally suppress our immune system on purpose, so that when we get organ transplants, the organ transplant will hold, so our body doesn't reject the new organ. Like, we know this stuff. Mold is used in chemical warfare in the military. We know this stuff. We know it's a problem, but you still have people that they just don't think it's that bad. They walk in, they go, oh, it's not the Ritz-Carlton in here, but
open the
you know
windows.
what I mean? It's open the windows, you're fine. And that nonchalant attitude that people are taking is really causing like a massive decline in public health. And that's what we're dealing with. And it's rampant in the military. And it's what's really nice to see is the military, people in the military, these families that are being impacted, they're standing up for themselves and they're taking action and they're pressing charges. And that's the only, unfortunately, when you have these players who don't feel like they need to have a certain standard of living or habitability for people, especially when it has the potential to make them sick. And when you have people that aren't taking it seriously, and at the other end of that is people literally being harmed, well, then of course, you're going to have to probably take some action, and that action is going to actually show them. When unfortunately people are writing $100 million checks because they've caused liability, well, that's when they start to learn, maybe we need to do something about this. And it's sad that it's gotten to that level. And this is the level that I see it on as an expert, because I'm hired in for these cases. But something's got to be done. I mean, we can't just keep getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Otherwise, what are we going to grow up to in 100 years from now? How's this world going to look? And it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. So did I hear right that you're actually involved in a legal case against the military?
Yeah, I've been involved in several.
So what do those look like?
So basically, it's a family. It typically starts as a family. Sometimes it's multiple families. Sometimes it's dozens of families. And essentially, I get brought in as an expert to evaluate, all of the information and the data in the case. So usually they'll have testing of all the different, exposures that they've had. Sometimes it's, it's the living room and a bedroom. Sometimes it's the entire house. I'll get sent emails, there's like a whole, it's almost like a war room, if you will.
Yeah.
Like I've like a big Dropbox of files that I have to kind of go through and review. And the goal for me is, I'm here as an expert. I want to be unbiased. If I think someone's bringing a claim that they really shouldn't bring, that's going to cause detriment, to the foundation of what we're trying to accomplish with just fair information, then of course, I'm going to say, hey, I don't believe that they wronged you in this case.
Yeah.
Right. unfortunately, in many of the cases that have been brought to me, there were significant, deviations from industry standard of care. And those deviations from that industry standard of care allowed people to get sick and allowed people to be damaged and lose their things. And we're talking, belongings they've had for 20, 30 years, all out the window. We're talking, hospital visits, time that they'll never get back. We're talking symptoms that we still don't know today if they'll ever recover from. Right. And so, it's really heart-wrenching to kind of have to go through those things. I don't particularly enjoy that side of what I do because it's emotionally draining and taxing. I get very empathetic in these types of situations because I'm trying to understand both sides. I'm trying to be unbiased and rationalize it. At the end of the day, when we have deviations from standard of care that are putting people in harm's way, I feel a sense of duty to make that truth become uncovered. Because at the end of the day, if we continue to sweep things under the rug, what we're going to get is a sicker and sicker society.